Welcome. The purpose of this video is to do a complete and thorough analysis of Junko Enoshima, the super high school level Gyaru, or model. We're going to be covering just about all of the publicly known information on Junko Enoshima. Now I'm going to issue 2 spoiler warnings. This first section will contain light spoilers, and the second section will contain heavy spoilers. When we get to the heavy spoiler section, I will issue another warning. Now, let's start with Junko's history. Junko Enoshima was born in an unknown year on December 24th. According to her, she cried tears of despair when she was born. At some point during her childhood, something happened that made her consider her birthday to be the day that she hated the most. We can't be sure of why this is, as there isn't enough evidence to point us in many directions. But there is at least one person who does know why Junko hates her birthday: her sister. From this, we can guess that whatever it was, it probably had something to do with her family. Junko grew up with only one friend, Yasuke Matsuda. Yasuke stood up for her time and time again, and unconditionally loved her. Just being by his side made Junko feel warm. Aside from spending time with Yasuke, Junko probably spent most of her time consuming media, mostly watching television. Now, I assume this because of her love of the fashion industry, her love of cute, cartoonish mascots, and all of the references that she makes to certain characters from TV. In episode 7 of Despair Arc, after watching Ryota Midori's unfinished anime, she says, confirming that Junko has watched her fair share of anime. As time went on, Junko and Yasuke grew apart, and while Yasuke went on to focus on becoming a great neurologist, Junko decided to become a part of the fashion industry. She became very well known. At one point, it seemed like her photos were lining all of the fashion magazines. She also acquired a good amount of money from her fashion career, to the point where she could regularly travel in expensive-looking limousines and drink rather expensive-looking beverages. Junko originally went to Gunma Prefectural Shibutani High School. At some point, Junko Enoshima set her sights on Hope's Peak Academy. To get accepted to Hope's Peak, a student has to be scouted by the school itself. For unknown reasons, Junko wasn't scouted for Hope's Peak Academy. Instead, Junko's admission to Hope's Peak Academy was a special case. Hope's Peak's board of directors recommended Junko Enoshima themselves, and even went as far as to guarantee her talent to the principal of Hope's Peak. And so, Junko Enoshima became a student at Hope's Peak Academy. She was assigned to the 78th class of students, and Junko was given the title Super High School Level Model, or Gyaru. Now, from this point forward, there is going to be heavy spoilers, and so I'm issuing the heavy spoiler warning. If you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and play Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, then come back to the video. Or stick around and get spoiled. Okay, here we go. At some point in Junko's childhood, she became obsessed with despair, and she also picked up sadistic tendencies. This is probably why she had only one friend. As she grew older, her obsession with despair and sadism only got worse. By the time she was admitted to Hope's Peak Academy, she was freely murdering and torturing complete strangers with no problem. She blows up a taxi driver along with the car, and she tortures one of Hope's Peak's board of trustee members for fun. You see, Junko Enoshima chose to go to Hope's Peak Academy because she wanted to use the school to drive the entire world into despair. She knew that the students at Hope's Peak were symbols of hope not just for Japan, but for the entire world. Junko somehow found out about Izuru Kamakura and broke into the facility that Hope's Peak was retaining him in. She shared her philosophy with him, namely, Izuru knocked her out, but did arrange to meet with her later. Junko wound up in Hope's Peak's hospital. On her way out, she came across Hope's Peak's Academy's super high school level animator, Ryota Midori. As he passed her by, something within Junko told her that he was important, and she forcibly grabbed him by the scarf and forced a conversation. Midori eventually shows Junko his unfinished anime, and Junko was impressed when she sees it, to the point of tears. Midori explains that his anime influences the viewer's brain, and uses techniques that some consider to be brainwashing. Junko moves Ryota to a secret facility that she received from one of Hope's Peak's trustees. Later, she blackmails Hope's Peak Student Council and has them gather late at night in a classroom. From there, she forces the student council to kill each other and records the whole thing. She then sends Hope's Peak's Reserve Corps students emails detailing not only the killing, but also Izuru Kamakura. Junko then reports the incident to the Hope's Peak staff. Upon reporting the incident to the staff, the school thoroughly interrogated her, using a variety of techniques. From polygraph tests to brain fingerprinting, the school tried to be as thorough as possible. What the school didn't know, however, was that Yasuke Matsuda, who by now had become the super high school level neurologist, was actively sabotaging their investigation in order to protect Junko. Yasuke tried to both protect and stop Junko Enoshima. He even used his talent as super high school neurologist in an attempt to stop Junko's plans. In the end, he failed and was killed by Junko. After murdering Yasuke and desecrating his corpse, Junko then steals his research. Junko then goes on to force Ryota to help her create 2 brainwashing videos. Once the brainwashing videos are finished, she arranges the brainwashing of Chiza Yukizome, goes on to brainwash Class 77B while having them watch as their class rep, Chiaki Ninami, is murdered. After that, Junko has the Reserve Corps students, who by now have all been brainwashed, and has them attack Hope's Peak Academy. As a result of the attack, most of the students and staff members at Hope's Peak die. But Junko makes sure that her class, the 78th class, survives the attack. After the Reserve Corps students massacre Hope's Peak, Junko has them mass commit suicide. By her order, 2,357 Reserve Corps students committed suicide. At this point, one of Junko's brainwashing videos is out in the world, and because of this, the world falls apart, creating the tragedy. The principal of Hope's Peak Academy arranged for the remaining students to safely live within the school, away from the tragedy occurring outside. While the students were sealing off the school, Junko attempted to kill Makoto Naegi by throwing a wrench with such force that it became embedded in a wall. Fortunately, Makoto slips on a paper and avoids it, however. As part of her plan, Junko and her sister are 2 of the students who are chosen to live in the school until the conditions either get better outside, or if not, potentially spend the rest of their lives within the school. From there, Junko and her classmates spend a whole year in the school. She likely spent that year preparing for the next part of her plan. After their first year confined in Hope's Peak, Junko captures the principal and her other classmates, with her sister being the exception as her accomplice. Junko uses Yasuke Matsuda's research to brainwash the students, removing their memories from the past 2 years. In Kyoko Kirigiri's case, she even removes Kyoko's memory of her talent. As for the principal, she executes him while donning her Monokuma persona, then puts his bones in a present box. She sets up cameras everywhere and hijacks all the TV networks to broadcast what's going on to the whole world. From there, she has her sister dress and act like her, and has the now amnesiac 78th class put in classrooms. She eventually has them gather in the gymnasium, where she introduces them to her mascot, Monokuma. In order to conceal her identity, she uses Monokuma to orchestrate what she calls the killing game. As Monokuma, she also blackmails Sakura Ogami. She tells Sakura that if the killing game grows stale, Sakura must commit a murder in order to start or keep the killing game going. She eventually also decides to use her sister to show the other students that she is not to be taken lightly. She tricks her sister, telling her to rebel, and pretending like she intends to have her sister run the killing game with her. After her sister, who is still disguised as her, attacks Monokuma as part of the plan, Junko then kills her own sister. The killing game continues, with Junko providing motivation in order to keep the killing game going. After several murders and class trials, Kyoko Kirigiri breaks into the headmaster's office and steals Junko's master key. Enraged, as well as upset that the killing game had stopped, Junko then attempted to keep the game going and get revenge on Kyoko by murdering Makoto Naegi. Junko fails to murder Naegi, however, and is stopped by Kyoko. Junko then changes her plans. She gets her sister's dead body, which had been preserved, and uses it to stage a murder in Hope's Peak's garden. During the next class trial, she cuts the trial short in order to pressure the students to vote for someone. Her plan works, and her classmates vote for Makoto Naegi. But Makoto's execution is sabotaged by Alter Ego, and he is instead thrown into the trash room. Makoto escapes thanks to Kyoko, and the two head to the gym. Junko intends to execute Makoto again, but Kyoko points out that if Makoto is executed, Junko will lose. Kyoko also points out that killing Makoto would be unsatisfying for the audience, as they would think that Junko killed him because she couldn't beat him in a fair fight. Executing Naegi would be admitting defeat. Kyoko demands a retrial, and Junko accepts. But she changes the stakes and says that in addition to figuring out her true identity, they also need to solve all of the school's mysteries. During the final class trial, the remaining 78th class members figure out her identity. She finally reveals herself, and actually helps her classmates figure out all the secrets that she's hidden from them. This is because she thinks that the truth will cause them despair. To a certain degree, she was right. But Makoto refuses to give in to her or despair. She then tells them that she's changed the rules for the final vote. She decides to put Makoto's life on the line because of his resistance to her. Despite the odds, Makoto convinces his classmates to not give in to despair. They decide to unanimously vote for Junko Enoshima. Junko loses, but she's actually somewhat excited about the fact that she lost. She's enjoying the despair that losing gives her. Of note is that the enjoyment that Junko gets from losing is nothing compared to the enjoyment she got from murdering Yasuke earlier in the timeline. Junko then executes herself. Her last appearance is in the anime Danganronpa 3 Future Arc. She appears in the very last episode. Here it's revealed that Junko is so invested in what's going on in the land of the living that even from the afterlife, she's intently watching things unfold. This is where Junko's story in the world of Danganronpa ends. Now that we've gone over Junko's history, let's go over her personality. Junko's most defining personality trait is how fickle and quick to boredom she is. She quickly picks up hobbies only to drop them within a short period of time. An example of this is in Despair Arc, episode 5, when she tells her sister that she's picked up narrating as a hobby.
それ何? ああ、ナレーション風にね。そうなんだ。
The very next day, in the same episode, she tells her sister that she's grown sick of narrating.
一陣の風が吹き抜けた。それは後に希望が峰学園を、果ては世界を絶望の底に叩き落とす二人の記念すべき入学の瞬間であった。
ナレーション、純子ちゃんのマイブームなんだね。まあね、もう飽きたけど。
Junko is so quickly bored by things that, according to her, she even gets bored by her own personality, which causes her to randomly switch her behavior and change her appearance and personality on a whim. Junko actually has 7 alternate personalities that she'll choose to display. Royal, serious.
そうだね。答えるとすればどれでもないよ。なんていうか、もっと観念的なものなんだよ。
Outrageous.
ちょっと待ってよ。ひらめいちまったぞ。やっぱ漏水の美女つまんねえよな。それじゃ視聴者も納得しねえよな。よし、決めた。
Smart.
ちなみにここの窓や出入り口を封鎖したのは他でもない。あなた方自身だったのですよ。みんなでトンチンカンやったのです。
Cute.
もちろん投票だよ。だってそういうルールでしょ。ちなみにね、今回は最後の投票なので、投票のルール自体も変更することにしたんだ。
Sad.
あんた誰よ。
黒幕ですけど。あ、はじめまして。あ、こちらこそ。
And lastly, her Monokuma persona.
ぷぷぷ、そういうこと。つまりお前らは友達同士で殺し合ってたんだよ。
Due to her boredom, it's anyone's guess as to when and why she'll display one of these personalities. Another major trait of Junko's is her obsession with despair. Junko is utterly obsessed with despair. She feels that despair is messy and exciting, and the only thing that won't bore her. She tells Izuru that despair is the one thing that brings chaos to this world. Now, to be clear, Junko has her own version of what despair means. Junko's version of despair seems to be referring to the unpredictable behavior that occurs when a person is in a bad mental state. This is heavily implied near the end of episode 7 of Despair Arc, where she says that only despair's unpredictability can save you from a boring future. In reality, despair actually means this: the feeling that there is no hope and that you can do nothing to improve a difficult or worrying situation. Despair is essentially giving up. Regardless, Junko is utterly obsessed with her version of despair. She enjoys it so much that she will visibly drool when she considers a situation to be particularly despairful. Junko thinks that despair is interesting, but thinks that hope and peace are boring and predictable. While Junko does enjoy receiving this type of despair, her favorite pastime by far is inflicting this type of despair on others. This brings us to another one of Junko's major traits. Junko is extremely sadistic. Not only does she not have a problem torturing and killing others, but she actively revels in their suffering. Other than herself, seemingly nobody is off limits when it comes to her sadism. Not even her best friend or her own sister. One of the reasons why Junko is a sadist is because of another personality trait of hers. Junko is extremely selfish. Junko only cares about her own feelings. She doesn't care how other people feel, and so when they suffer, it doesn't bother her. During the last trial in Danganronpa 1, she tells the remaining 78th class that begging doesn't work on her. The truth is, Junko struggles to understand other people's emotions. A great example of this is in episode 7 of Despair Arc, when Junko and her sister bring Mikan to Ryota Midori. Take a look at this scene. Notice how Junko is struggling to understand their emotions. If you don't believe me, Junko confirms this herself shortly after by saying this. Ryota and Mikan are having an emotional moment, and Junko openly admits that she's not good with situations like this. Not only does she struggle to understand the emotions of others, but she's even aware of this. Another personality trait of hers is her pride. As Byakuya notes during the mutual killing game that she makes the 78th class participate in, Junko is incredibly prideful. She loves to win, and also loves when everything goes according to her plans. The only reason why Kyoko was able to convince Junko to redo the class trial for Mikuro Ikusaba's death was because of Junko's pride. When things really don't go Junko's way, she has a habit of throwing a sort of tantrum, during which she will often repeat phrases over and over again. The main things keeping Junko from becoming a masochist are her selfishness and pride. As much as Junko enjoys her version of despair, and as alluring as the despair she'll get from losing is, her selfishness and pride prevent her from ever actually failing on purpose to get said despair, and they cause her to do everything in her power to avoid losing. They also limit her enjoyment of despair at her expense. This creates an interesting problem for Junko. Once she's gotten rid of all of her loved ones, she only has herself left. The only way for Junko then to get the hardcore despair she enjoys is for her to suffer, but her pride prevents her from doing so. Those three qualities within her, Junko's pride and selfishness and her love for despair, are constantly clashing with each other. Junko was known as the super high school level Gyaru or model, and fitting this, she is shown to genuinely love fashion. One of the reasons why she had her sister pretend to be her was because, according to Junko, Junko was shown to be somewhat perverted, as she makes a good amount of sexual references when around Ryota Midori, Izuru Kamakura, and Yasuke Matsuda. When playing Monokuma, she regularly makes perverted and inappropriate comments to the 78th class. Despite her perversion, Junko is in fact ironically insistent that she's not easy, and that she keeps her virtue and virginity safe. She brings this up multiple times, sometimes randomly, and even her sister brings it up when pretending to be Junko. Now, Junko is self-aware to a certain degree. When it comes to describing herself, Junko admits that she's fickle, gets bored easy, openly admits that she has no friends, and isn't good with emotional situations that don't involve her own emotions. She is also aware of her own violent tendencies, as well as her tendency to create her own perverted version of things, like when she greets her sister by throwing a knife at her. An example of this is in episode 9 of Despair Arc, when she's trapped Ryota Midori. She tells him that she came to say goodbye, but then she clarifies that she's actually giving him a normal and ordinary goodbye. Junko is aware on some level that her behavior and her boredom are not normal. During the last class trial, Junko vocally wonders to the 78th class if she has some kind of illness, and even wonders if her boredom is some kind of illness in of itself. So let's review Junko's personality traits. She's fickle, quick to boredom, obsessed with her version of despair, sadistic, selfish, prideful, perverted, and struggles to understand other people's emotions. She does have a genuine passion for fashion, and she is self-aware of her own behavior to a certain degree. Now let's get into Junko's likes and dislikes. As far as Junko's likes go, Junko likes takoyaki, a ball-shaped Japanese snack, Yasuke Matsuda, despair, fashion, makeup, winning, power, and bait-and-switch thriller movies. As for Junko's dislikes, they are boring things, hope, peace, Makoto Naegi, and losing. Now let's go over Junko Enoshima's abilities. Junko Enoshima's main ability is her super high school level analytical prowess. Junko can analyze and intake large amounts of information at incredible speeds. Thanks to this ability, she can quickly identify patterns in behavior and therefore predict what people are going to do. This allows Junko to create highly effective plans within a short period of time, and she can quickly improvise if things don't go according to plan. Imagine if a person could read an entire book instantly. That person will be able to minimize the time they take learning information and maximize the time they spend learning how to use that information. That's roughly what Junko's analytical prowess allows her to do. By quickly processing information, Junko can take the time that a normal person would have to invest in taking in the information and instead use that time to learn how to use that information. This allows Junko to learn skills much quicker than the normal person. Examples of this is when Junko uses Yasuke Matsuda's research to brainwash the 78th class, and when she created her own artificial intelligence by studying Chihiro's work. However, Junko's analytical prowess only allows her to quickly take in information. That's it. Junko still has to learn how to use that information. If Junko is unable to figure out how to use that information, then she cannot put the information to use. An example of this is in Despair Arc Episode 8. Here, it is revealed that Junko tried and failed to make her own brainwashing video after analyzing Ryota Midori's video. The result was Mika and Sumiki's strange behavior after watching Junko's video. Junko very much needed Ryota to make the Despair video, and openly admitted that she was unable to do so herself. Super analytic prowess is a very overpowered ability, but it's limited to the owner's own capabilities. Junko's analytical abilities are weakened by the fact that Junko is Junko. In Danganronpa V3, there is a minigame called Super High School Level Development Plan. All of the students have stats that reflect their capabilities. Intellect has a range from 1 to 5 at level 1, with genius level individuals like Chihiro and Miyu being ranked a 5. Interestingly, Junko Enoshima's intellect rating is 4, despite having super analytic abilities. We can safely conclude that despite having super analytical prowess, Junko is actually not very smart. If Junko didn't have her analytical abilities, her intellect rating would drop by at least 2 points, maybe even 3. Aside from her super analytical prowess, Junko is also good at manipulating people. Because she has no problem with using violence, Junko excels at either being or threatening to become violent to get what she wants. She also has no problem blackmailing people. She couldn't care less how they feel. As the super high school level model, Junko can use her feminine appearance and charm to manipulate people into either doing what she wants or underestimating how dangerous she can be. Now that we've talked about Junko Enoshima's abilities, now let's talk about her notable relationships. First, let's talk about Junko's relationship with Mikuro Ikusaba, Junko's twin sister. In an unused alternate ending for Danganronpa 1, Mikuro mentions that ever since she was a kid, she was always compared to Junko. The two probably compete against each other quite a bit as kids. Constantly outperforming Mikuro probably caused Junko to have a low opinion of Mikuro. Mikuro ran away before entering middle school, which caused Junko to resent her sister. When speaking to the 78th class during the last class trial, Junko calls Mikuro pathetic and cites her running away as an example of this. By the time Mikuro returns to Japan, Junko openly looks down on Mikuro. She constantly puts Mikuro down for just about any reason that she can think of, whether it's shaming her for being flat-chested or calling her dumb, fat, and ugly. Danganronpa If also reveals that Junko may not even love her sister, as Junko cuts Mikuro off and out of her life in a relatively short period of time. Mikuro, on the other hand, openly loves Junko and tries to be as supportive as she can. Mikuro feels that Junko needs her, and that only she understands Junko. Specifically, in Danganronpa Despair Arc, Mikuro is shown to enjoy getting insulted by Junko. Now, this isn't shown in any other media besides Despair Arc, and that includes media that came after Despair Arc, such as the talent development plan in Danganronpa V3, which came later on. So I personally find Despair Arc's depiction of Mikuro to be questionable at best. Next up, let's talk about Junko's relationship with Yasuke Matsuda, Junko's childhood friend and the super high school level neurologist. Yasuke was Junko Enoshima's childhood friend. Yasuke cared about Junko. He always stood up for her. When he was told that someone knocked over a very extravagant sandcastle she was building, he got very angry and tried to find the culprit. In Danganronpa 0, Yasuke is shown to be willing to commit murders and deceive the school in order to protect Junko. Junko, on the other hand, developed an obsession with Yasuke because of how much she loved him. Danganronpa 0 mentions that Junko was almost obsessed with him to the point of insanity. Yasuke attending Hope's Peak Academy was likely one of the reasons why Junko chose to go to Hope's Peak herself. Despite her love and obsession for Yasuke, Junko still has no problem killing him in order to keep her plans going. She also has no problem taunting him before his death, and she even desecrates his corpse. Next, let's talk about Junko's relationship with Makoto Naegi, class of 78's super high school level good luck. Junko initially didn't think much of Makoto. In episode 5 of Despair Arc, Junko pays Makoto no attention, despite him being right in front of her. Later on, in the last episode of Despair Arc, Junko acknowledges that Makoto might cause her plans problems. However, Junko only sees Makoto as a threat because of his luck. She also calls him a loser, and overall underestimates him. Later during the killing game, it's shown that Junko thinks Makoto is boring and stubborn. Junko also dislikes Makoto because he resists her, and he refuses to give in to despair. Unlike villains like, say, the Joker, Junko actually doesn't like people who resist her, and therefore Junko very much does not like Makoto. Next, let's talk about Junko's relationship with Ryota Midori, class of 77B's super high school level animator. Despite initially being unimpressed with Ryota, Junko apparently comes to admire him after watching his anime. Junko moves him and his stuff to a secret facility, but Junko also allows him to continue working on his own anime. She tries and fails to replicate the brainwashing techniques in his anime, but never brings this up to Ryota. It's only when Ryota finally discovers her unfinished video that she brings it up to him and explains that she needs him to make it. She also seems embarrassed about how Mikan was acting towards Ryota due to her failed brainwashing video. Ryota is the only person that Junko allowed to live and walk away without either killing, brainwashing, or blackmailing them. She even says goodbye to him in the normal sense. Finally, let's talk about Junko's relationship with Izuru Kamakura, the super high school level hope. Junko initially tries to kill Izuru, hoping that his death will cause the world despair. Upon failing, she tells him that despair is the only thing that can save him from a boring future. Once Junko was finished using him, however, the two seemed to part ways entirely. So, that about wraps up this character analysis. We've gone over Junko Enoshima's history, her personality, her likes and dislikes, her abilities, and her notable relationships. I definitely learned a lot about Junko while doing research for this video, and I hope that you, the viewer, learned a couple of things as well. I will be doing more character analysis videos, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.